Highgate Cemetery is one of the most haunted places in London, as this presentation will reveal. Back in the 1800s, the British Parliament decided that 7 private cemeteries would be built, in what was back in the 19th century, the countryside around London. The third of these 7 cemeteries, built in 1839, was Highgate. The architect and builder, Stephen Geary, wanted to create with Highgate an eternal oasis of peace. Everybody of note and pomposity wanted to be buried there, but by 1854 the necropolis was so overcrowded with decaying residents that another 20 adjoining acres was acquired. In the early 1800s, the city's population had topped the 1 million mark, and this was despite a high mortality rate. As the population increased, graves jostled between shops and taverns, vying for space. Undertakers even dressed up as clergymen to perform burial ceremonies for the constant supply of dead. Many people were buried in shallow graves and quickly covered with lime. The stench and disease for those living amongst the decomposing corpses can only be imagined. People would come to Highgate just to enjoy a pleasant stroll away from the miasma and stench of the rest of the city. One 1839 publication glowingly praises the cemetery's close-cut lawns and flower borders. Think of that! In early Victorian England, even graveyards were preferable to the vile stink and squalor of the streets. The first residents booked plots to rest among the sweet flower plantings, clumps of evergreens and grand Victorian grounds. Gates and high stone walls combined with a private army of retired soldiers deterred the grave robbers, whose profession was a Victorian-era scourge. During Victorian-era London, if you were of high society, there was not a more sought-after final resting place than Highgate Cemetery. The graveyard became so popular that by the 20th century, tens of thousands of London's richest and most well-to-do, including many famous and illustrious names, had been buried behind the ornate walls of the graveyard, each family attempting to outdo the other with their beautiful monuments. When Highgate was first opened, it hadn't been long since Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, and this had sparked a European fascination with all things Egyptian. And of course the Victorians had a fascination with death, due to the high mortality rate. The cemetery's bombastic Egyptian avenue was the result of these two interests. Originally, two obelisks flanked the entrance, located in the heart of the cemetery. In modern times, entering this dank and overgrown passageway will take all the courage you can muster. An 1865 guidebook to Highgate rightly describes Egyptian Avenue as a cold, stony death palace. Originally, this 100-foot-long passageway, nicknamed the Street of the Dead, was enclosed. The ceiling collapsed long ago, but the 8 private burial vaults that line the passage remain. Each vault is secured with a heavy cast-iron door depicting an upside-down torch, a symbol for extinguished life. Behind each door there's room for a dozen coffins on stone shelves. Some people have reported eerie noises coming from within the vaults, which ensures they don't linger. If you wander off the marked trails, though, you risk falling through weakened stones into unseen subterranean chambers. Once you've fallen down into a forgotten coffin vault and are embracing a mouldered corpse, your cries for help, if you are able to make any, may not be heard, and you could unwittingly become a permanent resident. By the end of World War II, the 20-acre cemetery had fallen into neglect. When Germany bombed London during the Blitz, several vaults were destroyed and left cracked open. Ruin and decay had started taking its toll on the once beautiful mausoleums, headstones and crypts, leaving them in a state of disrepair. In fact, by the early 1960s, the entire cemetery had become completely abandoned, and the gates were closed to the public. Now stories of strange goings-on behind Highgate's vine-covered walls began to spread. The surrounding neighbourhoods also took a downswing, compounding the cemetery's decline. Soon the sprawling secluded sanctuary became a haven for drug abusers, runaways, vandals and the homeless. Highgate Cemetery was no longer a fashionable place to end your days horizontally. Profits dried up and upkeep ceased. For intrepid visitors like my sister and myself in the 70s, it was pretty much abandoned and overgrown like a jungle ruin. Burial vaults had collapsed, and the gates to the catacombs were wide open, showing the desecrated human remains of plundered coffins. As a child, this left an indelible impression on me. By the 1970s, Highgate Cemetery became a popular haunt at night for unsavory characters. It wasn't long before rumours of Satanism and occult activities circulated. While visiting the grave of a relative, one elderly woman claimed to be followed on 5 separate occasions by odd people who never spoke a word. She believed they were conducting strange ceremonies. Ghosts and ghouls apparently roamed the alleyways around the graveyard. People reported seeing red-eyed demons staring at them through the fence. And then there was the Highgate vampire. The vampire was said to be a medieval nobleman who had practiced black magic in Romania. His coffin was brought from Europe to England in the 18th century, and his cult-like followers bought him a house in the West End. He was buried at the site that eventually became Highgate Cemetery. He slumbered peacefully until, according to reports, Satanists performed a ritual at the cemetery. This woke him up. The Highgate vampire is said to be a tall, dark figure that glides through the cemetery during the wee hours. Those who have witnessed its presence say that it is accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature. It has also caused clocks and watches to stop. Animals in the vicinity of this phantom flee in fright, and the apparition has been blamed for scores of dead foxes on the cemetery grounds. Highgate locals reported ghostly sightings in and around the eastern section of the cemetery. 2 more different figures were described. One was an elderly woman with long white hair drifting among the graves. The other ghostly figure was a skeleton who stood by the main gate. A paranormal encounter was described by a man walking his dog. It was about 8 p.m. on a July evening in 1965 that Brian Bourne was walking his dog before heading out to a party. As he passed the western gate of the cemetery, Bourne said he felt a sudden chill and an unnatural stillness. As his gaze turned instinctively towards the cemetery, he saw a black oozing substance flow down the wall. A tall, imposing shape materialized out of this liquid. When the figure had materialized, he claimed it was a man wearing dark clothes and had terrifying glowing red eyes. Bourne's dog growled at the apparition, and by this stage the dog walker was already running up the street. Bourne is quoted as saying, "There was no face where eyes would have been if it were human. There were just 2 red pits, red glows. This wasn't a ghost, this was an entity. It was simply not human." The local newspaper, the Hampstead and Highgate Express, started to receive letters from frightened readers about ghostly experiences around the cemetery. One resident came forward who claimed to have had a first-hand encounter with this phenomenon, although he requested that his name be withheld to avoid his account from being subjected to ridicule. According to this visitor, he had been hypnotized by something in the cemetery after he had gone there late one afternoon to look around. As day became dusk, he decided it would be a good idea to leave, but he realized he had become hopelessly lost. Not being a superstitious person or even believing in the existence of ghosts, he walked calmly around looking for the exit gate, when suddenly he became aware of the presence of something behind him. Swinging around, his gaze fixed on a human-shaped apparition less than 6 feet away. This tall, dark spectre was hovering just above the ground. He found himself transfixed to the spot, completely unable to move, drained of energy by some powerful hypnotic force that, in a matter of seconds, rendered him unconscious to any sense of time or his surroundings. So great was the intensity of this force that he remained like this for what seemed like several minutes, before the spectre abruptly vanished and he slowly regained his normal faculties. This account was intriguing, since the shaken man, an accountant, was a sincere and logical person, and not the type liable to fantasy or exaggeration. Disturbances from within Highgate Cemetery were not always supernatural in nature. The problems with the dead started during Victorian times with exploding coffins. Highgate Cemetery has many mausoleums. Regulations at the time required wooden coffins to have another lead shell inside them to prevent miasma leaking out. As the bodies rotted in their hermetically sealed resting places, the buildup of gases caused some coffins to explode, causing a great shock and violent nausea to any unlucky passers-by. The solution was to drill a small hole in the coffin, place a narrow pipe through it, and then light a match, so the foul gases could burn off hygienically. In 1967, a young couple walking in the same spot as Bourne saw a figure with an unpleasant face standing by the gate staring at them. The couple stopped and looked back at it. The figure slowly disappeared. The man, Thomas O'Loughlin, was so fascinated by what he saw that he returned to the cemetery with a friend the following night. Once O'Loughlin and his friend were inside Highgate Cemetery, they said they heard an odd booming noise, and a shadowy figure passed in front of them. The two fled the cemetery and never returned. Dozens of other people claim to have witnessed strange phenomena, describing all manner of ghosts, from spectral cyclists to disembodied voices. There are reports of a figure who gazes into space, paying no attention to anyone nearby. If you get close to her, she vanishes, reappearing a short distance away, still gazing into space. One old lady claimed she had been terrified by a tall, dark man who floated at her from within the cemetery gates. She had been walking her dog late one night, and as she approached the gates of the cemetery, Her little dog started to howl and tried to retreat. She looked up and saw a figure with glaring eyes staring at her. In a matter of seconds, it promptly vanished. Of the individuals who regularly entered Highgate, 2 young men with clear interests in the occult emerged. David Farrant, a local, who, after spending a night there in 1969, wrote about seeing a grey figure. The other investigator of the paranormal was Sean Manchester, and they soon became the chief voices of the Highgate mystery. Manchester, an expert on matters of the occult, presided over the British Occult Society and founded the Vampire Research Society. Farrant identified as a Wiccan and mystic and established the British Psychic and Occult Society. Sean Manchester believed it was a supernatural manifestation in origin, as opposed to the traditional caped human Dracula of folklore. There was also a level of destruction in the cemetery, David Farrant recalls. Vaults had been broken open and coffins literally smashed apart. One vault near the top gate was wide open, and one could see the remains of a skeleton where it had been wrenched from a coffin. Another vault on the main pathway had been thus entered, and one of the coffins inside set alight. Escalating the now media frenzy that accompanied these eyewitness accounts were Farrant and Manchester, who had grown increasingly combative towards one another in the press. During a joint March interview with ITV News, the pair declared through a series of dares that a vampire hunt would commence in Highgate Cemetery. An official vampire hunt began on Friday, the 13th of March 1970. The live broadcast aired early on the evening of the 13th, and within 2 hours a sizable crowd had swarmed over the gates and walls into the locked cemetery, despite police efforts to control them. It's not clear exactly what happened that night, but there were rumours of tombs being opened. Farrant was found soon after by police, carrying a hastily constructed crucifix and a wooden stake, and claimed in his book that he forced open a family vault and was about to drive a stake through a body, but was deterred at the last minute by a companion. Remains identified as belonging to a woman who had died 100 years earlier were found desecrated near her grave. Farrant was jailed in 1974 for damaging memorials, which he insisted had been caused by Satanists, not him. Farrant and Manchester continued their paranormal investigations at Highgate Cemetery throughout the 1970s. The relationship between the two men continued to deteriorate, which the tabloids at the time were keen to detail to their readers. When Sean Manchester released his own account of the Highgate mystery, called The Highgate Vampire, David Farrant responded with Beyond the Highgate Vampire. Sean Manchester formally announced in 2013 his retirement from public life and would no longer participate in further TV or radio interviews, having decided to spend the rest of his days in creative contemplation. In the advent of the internet, both men continued to voice their differences for years. David Farrant lived the rest of his life in the vicinity of Highgate Cemetery until his death in April 2019. Perhaps he is now one of the many ghostly figures that wander amongst the crumbling tombs. In the 1980s, the Friends of Highgate Cemetery, which is a local trust, began a massive restoration project, clearing the pathways and uncovering the spectacular tombs that had been neglected for years. It continues to be a popular place for enthusiasts seeking evidence of the occult and paranormal, and for those seeking neither, but purely out of historical interest. Highgate Cemetery is divided into two sections. As of 2013, the West Cemetery is only accessible by an hour-long guided tour, which also includes access to the East Cemetery. The guided tours will prevent you becoming lost in the labyrinth of twisting pathways and creeping wilderness, thus minimizing the risk of you becoming a forever resident. Well, my dears, I hope you enjoyed the stroll through Highgate Cemetery. And we did it at night. How brave are we? Yes, Highgate Cemetery. As I mentioned when I did the presentation about Elizabeth Siddal, that I had actually been around Highgate Cemetery with my sister. Now, that would have been about the mid-70s. About 75, 76. It would have been around about that time. Possibly 77. I'm not too sure now. I was really quite young. But at that time there were still interviews going on and reports in the newspaper about the Highgate Cemetery vampire and the various hauntings that manifest there. I don't remember if my sister talked about that. Possibly she did. I just don't remember now. What I do remember is being absolutely awestruck by the place. The immense size of it, the evident decay, and the fact that it was neglected. At that stage, it had really fallen into severe neglect. It was just left to rot, so to speak. Yeah, so I was too young to register who was buried there, any historical graves. I was just, gobsmacked, really, seeing this place and those. I can remember steps leading down to the vaults, and it was open, and we ventured down there. But my sister wasn't brave enough to go in. I don't really blame her. Possibly not the dead people she was afraid of, but whatever living person might be lurking in there. Yeah, but I remember her telling me that she had roller skated through the cemetery, which I thought was so cool. I thought she was so cool. My sister was a punk rocker. So to me that was just like, wow, roller skated through the cemetery. So that's about my memory of it. I would love to get back there. I really would love to go. As mentioned at the end of the presentation, unfortunately the west side now is only available through a guided tour, an hour-long guided tour. I don't think I would like that. I like cemeteries because it's such a peaceful oasis away from the busy world. And I really want to be alone with my thoughts. I want to be able to walk through at my own leisure. I do not like guided tours of any sort anywhere. Really don't. I prefer to get my own impressions. It wouldn't be for me, but, anyone who's going there as a tourist, it may be better for you. You get to know about graves you otherwise wouldn't have known about just walking through it. Some years back, I was going to cover the case of the Highgate vampire. This was really some years back. And specifically the Highgate vampire. I wasn't going to cover the cemetery in general. And by the time I kept putting it off, and by the time I got round to doing it, I wanted to sort of try and interview the principal characters, which were David Allen Farrant, and Sean Manchester. I believe he's called Bishop Manchester nowadays. But David Farrant had just passed away, which was unfortunate. And then I found out that Bishop Manchester was no longer giving interviews, so that was also a dead end. Anyway, some years later, I finally arrived and did this presentation about Highgate Cemetery, the hauntings, and a mention of the Highgate vampire. You notice I didn't use any images of Bishop Manchester in this presentation. I have heard that he's very particular about his image being used, and so I will respect his wishes. I didn't want to have any problems there. Yes, I would have loved to have quizzed Bishop Manchester on a few things about this case, but it's a shame he's no longer really interested. I can understand that. He's given extensive interviews, detailed explanations of what went on. He's even written books, so just be going over the same ground. I might start having a look. It's always a matter of time for me, how much time I've got, but I would like to look into it a bit more and find out exactly. I do know that he specifically said it wasn't one of these Hollywood-type Draculas, these vampires with the capes and all that rubbish, that it was indeed a supernatural or demonic manifestation that preyed on human energies. I will include links to various articles, and one was a interview, I think it was about 1991 on TV with Sean Manchester, so I'll leave the link to that. And also about a case that he was involved in. 2 16-year-old girls were walking in Highgate Cemetery. I won't go into it at great length because you can read it at your leisure, but one of them started to get nightmares and visitations of this horrible ghastly face at the window, and was drained of energy and was anemic and getting worse and worse. And eventually she came into contact with Sean Manchester, who helped her through this. He found out the source of the haunting or the energy vampirism and tracked it down to its lair. Well, as you know, dear viewers, when I present these vignettes for your entertainment, it doesn't actually mean that I believe in everything that is said in them, as some trolls on YouTube might suggest. Everyone has their own beliefs, and I am not going to discount anyone's accounts in this presentation if the people believe that they saw something, then they might well have seen something. Who am I to say that they didn't? And I wouldn't, because I myself have seen 2 apparitions in my life. And I would fully expect people to go, well, that's just crap, but, you just imagined it. Of course I expect that. I don't mind that. I know what I saw. I had witnesses. So maybe there is some natural explanation that we do not have yet. But it certainly can't be explained by any science. Perhaps they might say mass hallucination. Well, I don't know how that works. That's pretty incredible to me, that another person can project a thought into another person's mind and that they both see exactly the same thing. Perhaps there is a natural scientific explanation for what I witnessed on 2 separate occasions over the span of years. But regarding the Highgate vampire, now I'm not discounting disembodied entities. I truly believe that we survive our physical form, that our energy survives the physical body, the vehicle that carries our soul. I truly believe that. And I believe that this energy form that survives our physical body can be witnessed from time to time. It operates on a different frequency to us in our physical form, which is why it is not normally visible. So yes, it is quite possible that people did see something within Highgate Cemetery. But regarding the vampire, does Dracula roam abroad in Highgate? I doubt it. That's just my personal belief. I mean, a disembodied entity is, for me, possible. I also believe that a demonic entity could possess a human being. I think there is enough evidence to support that. But a supernatural, demonic force from a different dimension, animating a dead and decayed physical body, I don't believe that myself. Once the body is dead, it is dead, and it decays, and nothing's going to reanimate it. Let's just play along and say that there was such a thing as a supernatural entity being able to animate a dead human form. Even if that was the case, if you were to hammer a stake through a dead, decayed heart, it wouldn't do anything to the demonic supernatural form, because you cannot kill that form anyway. It lives in a different dimension. So what would be the point of hammering a stake through its heart? That doesn't make any sense to me. And why would a supernatural being want human blood? Energy, yes. I mean, there are human vampires, so I can quite imagine that even after they have passed into the spiritual realm, that they still crave energy and continue to be vampires of energy in that state. But blood, it would just be like eating black pudding, which is congealed blood. I mean, or pig's blood. It's just going to go straight through you. It doesn't give you any sort of special energy or supernatural power. And human blood, drinking that is obviously not good. It can be very harmful, including the obvious things like hepatitis C and hepatitis B and HIV and other blood-borne illnesses. It's not something that's recommended. So would a supernatural demonic entity that lives in another dimension want human blood? I myself can't imagine it. At this point, someone might say adrenochrome, that they're getting some sort of vital adrenaline energy from the blood. I can't comment on that. I just don't believe that a supernatural manifestation can animate a human body. But that's just my belief, and I'm not going to discount what these others claim that happened at Highgate Cemetery, and that vaults were found, that the lair of this vampire was found, that its haunting presence was eradicated. At least Sean Manchester did say that you cannot kill a demonic force, that he only eradicated the haunting from Highgate Cemetery, but he couldn't kill the demonic force. At least he said that. That makes sense, but I cannot support the theory of a supernatural being animating a dead human body, purely because I've never seen it happen myself. Based on those grounds, if I was to see it happen, then I would believe it, absolutely. Just on a side note, I actually did sleep overnight in a cemetery in Australia. back in the 90s with my ex-girlfriend. She was very intrepid. There was a lot of things that I did from her coaxing, and I never would have done normally, but one of those was sleeping in a cemetery, and I can vouch that I didn't see any apparitions there, although we were keen. That was the reason why we stayed overnight. Didn't see anything. Woke up about 3 a.m. with mice running over us. I mean, that's their domain. They're definitely entitled to treat us as a bit of the landscape. But no, unfortunately didn't see any supernatural apparitions there. Would have loved to. So I want to know your thoughts. Is it possible for a demonic being to inhabit and reanimate a dead body, to bring it back to life, that it can wander upon the earth, roam the earth, and target human individuals and drain them of their energy/blood? I would love to know your opinion on that. Let us go now and have a look at a few different interesting things I found out about Highgate Cemetery. So this is one of the articles I will leave a link to. The haunting of Elizabeth Wodgila. I'm not even going to bother pronouncing that. I can't do it. So this article is about her haunting and her contact with Sean Manchester and how it all came about. I will leave that for you. This one is about the grave of Malcolm Robert Andrew McLaren. Malcolm McLaren. How interesting. And he was, of course, the manager of the Sex Pistols. Died rather young, actually. I love his... why is this not going down the page? Oh, because this is showing the full photo of it. It looks very Hollywood, doesn't it, with this? Better a spectacular failure than a benign success, indeed. So I will leave the link to that. Quite interesting. But this one here... I love this. This is a glass house in one of London's oldest cemeteries, Highgate, of course, and it's on sale for $8.3 million, if you've got that to spare, and the agent selling it knows it's not everyone's cup of tea. So it's actually in or bordering on Highgate Cemetery, this glass house. I'm not against the idea of living in a cemetery. I don't like that thing, though. I'm really not a modernist. I hate that horrible glass aquarium. I would not want to live in it. Indeed, I would like to live in the cemetery in a Gothic old mansion, but not that thing. It may be of interest to you, my dear readers, to check this out. I mean, what a view. What a view. Well, my dears, I think that is about it. But if I can think of anything between now and tomorrow, I will include it in case I have forgotten it. I do hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Let me know if you've been to Highgate Cemetery yourself. And just let me know your input, what you think about what was mentioned during the presentation. As always, thank you so much for being present and watching and being my supporter. God bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.